Hi, good afternoon. So tonight is Chanukah, so we're going to learn about Chanukah. Even though it's not Chanukah yet, I was debating between the Parsha and Chanukah, but we're going to go for Chanukah because I think that's what everyone's excited for. So one of the things that when we learn Chassidus, what it does and it really unveils is that there's like two parts to our religious practice. We have like the abstract ideas and themes and energies of the time. And then there's all like the nitty-gritty details of the things that we do and like the halacha of what we do. And very often there seems to be, unless you make a conscious effort to connect the two, there can be a disconnect between the energy of what we're doing and our practice. Especially the more detailed the practice becomes, the less we can sense the energy that's in it because it feels kind of so specific. It's like, how does this tie into, the broader picture of why we're doing this? And that can leave us feeling about like halachic things or the things that are a little more detailed, that they're kind of dry and it's hard to connect to them. Just coming to the mitzvah of Chanukah, exactly how high your menorah needs to be, where you're placing your menorah, what time you're lighting the menorah, which, there's all of these questions automatically that are coming up, this detail, that detail. And I think one of the amazing powers that Chassidus has is that through the exploration of the theme of the holiday and really getting to the core of what this is about, it explains to us why these details are so important, and it allows us to connect to these details and see how these details are actually completely and totally aligned with the energy of the time. And then through that practice, we can ourselves get more in touch with that energy. So that's sort of a little bit what we're going to try to do today. Look at some of the details of the mitzvah of the menorah, of how we light the menorah, and also talk a little bit about the theme of Chanukah and why we do things in such specific ways. So an interesting thing about Chanukah and the main mitzvah of Chanukah, which is lighting the menorah, is that the menorah, which is a commemoration of the lighting of the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, is the one that we light today is different than the one that was lit in the Beis Hamikdash. The one in the Beis Hamikdash had only 7 branches, and the one that we light has 8 branches. Additionally, the one that was in the Beis Hamikdash, when part of the lighting of the Beis Hamikdash, of the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, was that it was actually done during the daytime, not at nighttime. It was done around Plag Mincha, which is around an hour and a quarter before nightfall. So it was lit specifically during the daytime, as opposed to the menorahs that we light, which are supposed to, there's different, going back to the nitty-gritty details, but different times that people have accepted to light, but it's definitely supposed to burn through nightfall. It's supposed to burn and be lit through the darkness. So we can explain specifically the first one by saying, the reason we have 8 candles is because the 1 flask of oil stayed lit for 8 days. So therefore we have 8 candles. And then we come to the famous question that the Beis Yosef poses, which is there's whole svarim that literally are just answers to this one question. And that question is, the miracle, though, was only 7 days because the first day that the oil burnt wasn't a miracle yet. That's just normal, right? Oil burns for 1 day. So the first day that it burnt wasn't the miracle. So then we're only left with 7 miraculous days. So we may as well have a 7-branch menorah because there's only 7 days of the miracle. And so there's various answers given. The one that is often cited is that just the finding of the pure flask was a miracle for itself. That the Greeks came in with the intention to impurify, to desecrate all of the oil that was in the temple, and the fact that we were able to find one with the seal of the Kohen Gadol on it that was not desecrated is already a miracle, and that's why we light. And then the subsequent 7 days that it burns, and that's why we light 8. But these are, again, just some details of the mitzvah of the menorah. And to understand why we light in this way, specifically after dark, specifically 8 and not 7, we're going to talk a little bit about what the theme of Chanukah is. So on a simple level, we could say that the theme of Chanukah is, there's a lot of different parts of the story, right? There's the winning of the war. There's the overcoming of light over darkness. That's what people will say, right? When you talk about Chanukah, it's in the winter. It's in a dark time. It's when the days are short and we're lighting our candles. We're bringing light into the darkness. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, but to step back a little bit, looking at the conflict between the Greeks and the Jews. So the Greek empire that was basically conquering throughout the whole Asian, European continents, wherever they went, they didn't just like kill people out for no reason. They were basically trying to build an empire. And when you're trying to build an empire, you're incorporating all those other countries and cultures into yourself. And the Greeks, on some level, were quite open-minded to all the other cultures and to accepting and taking in, if you just look historically, of all the influences that obviously happen when there's these conquerings that go on, but obviously the cultures are going to be influencing each other, and they were open to these cultures. So in the fight of the Hellenists against the Jews, it wasn't a fight necessarily to destroy Judaism entirely. Additionally, our sages contrast the story of Chanukah with the story of Purim, where the story of Purim was Haman was seeking to actually destroy the Jewish people physically, to kill us out, a genocide, to annihilate our bodies. That's what Haman wanted to accomplish. That was the miracle of the Purim story, is the survival of our bodies. Versus the Chanukah story, again, as long as you were willing to adapt to, it seems like if the Jewish people would have been more willing to adapt to the Hellenistic culture, the Greeks didn't have a problem with them existing. It wasn't an existential thing. It wasn't about their bodies. There was some sort of deeper spiritual war going on over here. And this spiritual war is going to connect us to our 8 candles. Why specifically we have 8 candles. So a very interesting thing going back to this is that when the Greeks went into the Beis HaMikdash, specifically we see the action of what they're trying to do is to bring impurity. To bring impurity to the Beis HaMikdash, to bring impurity to the oil. That's why it says, right, they were like slaughtering pigs on the Mizbeach, or specifically tampering with these seals. There was like this intention to bring impurity. So what was the problem with purity? Purity and impurity, the laws of purity and impurity, which we aren't as familiar with right now because during the time of the Beis HaMikdash, you had to actually there's many laws. There's different types of impurity and how some of them pass from person to person. Some of them it depends on how, they all have the different types of impurity have different viral loads of how infectious they are, of how far the impurity will go. And it's a very extensive set of laws. And the whole set of laws of purity and impurity all belong under the category of chayk, which means a rule, a statute that we do not know the reason for. We cannot understand the laws of purity and impurity. They're not rational laws. They don't really make any sense. And the whole function of how it works, like, okay, so you touch this little bug and all of a sudden what, I have like cooties? Like, it's not a physical thing that's coming into you, this impurity. Why is it that this bug or this thing touching this vessel is going to turn this thing impure? Impurity is it's not something that you could scan with some sort of laser and see that this is a real physical reality. No, it's a purely spiritual reality. And then you fix it either by waiting a certain amount of days, going to a mikvah. The way that it's fixed also doesn't seem to be a fitting way to, like, I'm washing something off, but I'm not washing it there's nothing physical on it. So what exactly is being like rinsed off? So again, it doesn't really seem, doesn't make sense. They don't make sense. The laws of impurity and impurity do not make sense. And this super rational commitment that we have to Judaism is the thing that really got to the Greeks. This is the thing, this was anti the Hellenistic culture. The Hellenistic culture is all about humanism, all about, the power of the human mind and human understanding. So as long as something can fit into that paradigm where it makes sense, where I see, you can serve gods, gods have a god or multiple gods, they can have their purpose, they can have their role in, having a spiritual life can serve a role, it can make sense, it can bring a feeling of purpose into your life, it can give you, it can create community, right? There's so many benefits that we can see to having some sort of religious observance. And so that idea of religious observance in order to fulfill something that works within my mind, that makes sense to my mind, and that's serving me in some way, that works together with the Greek culture. That works together with the Hellenistic culture. What doesn't work with the Hellenistic culture is serving something that makes no sense. Doing things that don't make sense and that don't seem to serve us in any way. How does that make sense? Why would you do that? And that basically undermines the fact that that there are people who are willing to be committed to these things that are completely and totally super rational. Being committed to these things that I cannot grasp in my mind, that goes entirely against that Hellenistic mindset. That's the war of the Greeks. And so we'll go into the Beis Hamikdash and destroy all these silly, what is this seal on this bottle of oil? It's not saying that it's FDA approved and that it's healthy to consume. That would make sense. It's saying that this has been pure and it hasn't been touched. What does that mean? What is the purpose in that? There is none. So that destruction of the seal on the oil is saying we don't agree with this super rational commitment to your faith and to Torah and to mitzvahs. And so like we said, that extends into learning Torah. Vast amounts of Torah, and the big majority of the Torah, is actually very rational and makes a lot of sense, right? If you go through, Gemara, a lot of it can really teach you how to think very logically. A lot of it is very logical thought processes. And again, throughout the Torah, we see the basic moral code and ethical code that is set up in the Torah is something that has been pretty broadly accepted by the entire world because so much of it makes so much sense. So much of the Torah does make sense. However, a Jew's learning Torah is not supposed to start from a place of this is a logical, intellectual endeavor. We're not studying it as if I was, in university doing Bible criticism or whatever, trying to figure out exactly whatever. We don't have to get into all the details of the origins and this and that, right? That's not the Jews' approach to Torah. We're not learning it to strengthen our brains, to engage in intellectual gymnastics. That's not the purpose in studying Torah. The purpose in studying Torah, and when a Jew comes into Torah, and our approach before we begin to learn, is we're supposed to come in with a certain sense of surrender of ourselves. I'm supposed to if you really wanted to grasp the Torah on its deepest level, what I would be doing is taking my own mind and completely emptying it and surrendering it before what I'm about to enter. Because I know that what I'm about to learn is God's wisdom. It's not an intellectual pursuit. I'm about to have Hashem's wisdom come into my own brain, which is not rational. It doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. So as we go through, when we say what we say on Chanukah, we talk about how the point of what the Greeks wanted to do was, in Bimei Matisyahu, we say, their point was, lahashkicham terasecha, to make us forget your Torah. So not lahashkicham ha-Torah, lahashkicham terasecha. If you want to learn Again, we're open to philosophies. We're open to study. We're open to exploration of ideas. But the fact that you're saying that this is God's ideas, the fact that you're saying that this is Hashem's wisdom, the fact that you're connecting this to a space that's completely superrational, beyond human, that doesn't work. You have to move away from that. If you want to learn it as something that you want to learn, fine. But if you're going to be connecting to it in this way of acknowledging that this is from God and that this is, Hashem's truth, that's not going to work. And extending also into mitzvah observance. When I think we can all see many mitzvahs that really enhance our lives. I think in the current world that we live in, Shabbos is like such a blessing that I think most people can really feel that with, the fast-paced, connected nature of our world, to be able to take a break from all of that, to put our electronics away, not to be hearing the news, to separate from that space. It's probably, we could recommend Shabbos for all human beings to keep in the current world, and do very well for people's anxiety levels, mental health, family, to be able to spend time with your family in a way that, people are focused and not disconnected. So we can think of lots of logical reasons that Shabbos makes a lot of sense to keep. And going through many mitzvahs, we can see, again, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of it makes a lot of sense, seems to be a moral code that is logical. And the benefits, we don't even necessarily always realize the benefits of the fact that our observance creates such a sense of community. And so many people in the world feel so alone. They don't have anyone who they feel connected to. But when you're Jewish and you're involved in Jewish observance, you always have someone who is a family member. You always have someone who you could connect to. And when you see someone, when you're traveling, you feel a sense of kinship, right? So there's so many beautiful things and wonderful things that Torah mitzvahs add into our lives. However, again, that's not why we do the mitzvahs. And if that was, then how would we know that that was why you're doing it? When one of these things come up and doesn't seem to be serving me, then I would stop doing it, right? So if, at one point it wouldn't be convenient for me to keep Shabbos, I don't see how it's enhancing my whatever. Obviously, if there's pikuach nefesh always comes first. Your life always comes first. But in another case, then I would drop it. So at the core of our commitment and the fact that we stay committed to our Judaism is this fact that we're acknowledging that it's not that we do these things because they make sense or that they enhance our lives. We do these things because they are Hashem's will. And Hashem's will connects us to Him Himself. So these all fall into that same idea that a Jew has a connection with Hashem Himself. And that connection is not a rational connection. That connection is not a logical connection. That connection is a supernatural, super rational bond with Hashem. It doesn't make sense. You can't really explain it. You can't really understand it. But it exists, and it's the glue that basically keeps at the core of our religion. And this was the thing that the Greeks were fighting against, as we said, is symbolized in the flasks of oil. So what happens in the Beis HaMikdash? They win this battle, they win the war against the Greeks miraculously through Mesiras Nefesh, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And they come back into the Beis HaMikdash, and they see all the oil has been tampered with and is not pure, and they just want to light the menorah again. They want to get back into doing the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. And so they're searching and searching, and they find this one flask that we say has the seal of the Kohen Gadol on it. It has not been touched, and then they're able to light this. They're able to light this flask of oil. Now, the interesting thing about oil is that in Kabbalah, oil is always compared to Chachma. Oil is compared to Chachma. Chachma is the first of the 10 spheres. It's the highest of the 10 spheres. And oil is compared to Chachma. Some of the reasons that this parallel is drawn is, first of all, oil always is floating beyond, on top of, right? If you have the water, the oil is going to float on top, or really anything. Like it's going to rise, well, not anything, but anything viscous probably. It's going to rise above that because it has like this heavier weight, right? So it's the oil is going to float above, and that's the same way as Chachma, which transcends and raises up to the top. And there's various other reasons given that oil is compared to Chachma. So Chachma is the first of our spheres. Our spheres are the way that we express and communicate with the world. And the beginning step of that is within myself, right? Within myself, before I can communicate to someone else, I have to begin the steps of communicating first to myself. And that begins in my intellectual process. Chachma is the birth of an idea, the first seed of the idea before it becomes expanded, before it's communicatable. Once it's communicatable, it already has drawn out into Bina. Into Bina is when I take that first flash of an idea and I flesh it out and I'm able to share it, that's when it becomes Bina. Chachma is before I can share it. I think we've all had these experiences where we've had either you have a new idea, you have the feeling of a new, it's not a feeling because it's not an emotion, but it's a tingle of a new idea, of something that you understand something new and you're just beginning to grasp it, but you can't really explain it to yourself fully yet, or you want to create something, you're an artist, and you have the first vision of what you want to create. Again, it's not fleshed out at all yet, but it's just that first beginning, something's there that I can pull at. So that's Chachma, and then it expands into Bina. After I sit down and I work it out, and then I'm able to expand the idea, that expansion is Bina. So Chachma comes from the right side of the brain. Bina comes from the left side of the brain. Chachma is a spark. It's not really, you can't really identify individual parts of it, versus Bina is when you can start to draw it out into individual parts. In Chachma, everything is connected. In Bina, we start to have distinctions and individuality and things like that, able to see the boundaries and of the lines, basically. Without Bina, we wouldn't end up having any understanding of it because we need those boundaries. Without the boundaries, the idea doesn't really exist because then it's just completely, totally still part of the universe or part of something bigger. So we need those distinctive boundaries. But once it comes down into the distinctive boundaries, the idea also becomes much more limited. So you can have a vision for if you want to paint something or you want to write something, and you have the vision of what it is that you want to express in this painting or in this poem or something. And then comes the job of picking the specific colors and filling it in. And all of a sudden it starts to express itself in a way that you can share. But it's also, now it's only pink and not blue. Or now I use this specific word, but that means that I cannot use, excluding all the other words that are around it, right? So that's the difference between Chachma and Bina. When we said that the oil represents Chachma, the oil that the Greeks destroyed were all in the Heichal of the Beis Hamikdash. That's the language that it says, is that they came in and destroyed the oil that was in the Heichal, the oil that was in the Heichal. The Heichal represents Bina. It represents expansion. The oil represents the Chachma. There is Chachma that goes into Bina. There is the beginning of the spark of an idea that then can be drawn down and then can be expressed into something else. But higher than Chachma that goes down into Bina is a level of Chachma that transcends beyond Bina that cannot be really compressed. It's the chachma that's connected to the essence of your soul. Where does the new idea come from? Where does this spark of chachma comes from? The spark of chachma, of the new idea, comes from you, from your essence. And you yourself cannot be limited into something, right? Your essence cannot be limited into just a few words or into one specific picture. Your essence can't be limited. It's would any of us feel comfortable saying, drawing a self-portrait and saying, this is an absolute, complete, total representation of me? That feels so off. Like, we're so opposed to that. It's like, really, it would hurt us. And it hurts us when someone else does it to us. Like when someone tries to define us in a way and says, this is who you are. There's nothing more irksome than that, because we know that we're so much deeper than that. So there is chachma that we can, there is a part of myself that I can express into Bina. I can draw it down. I can flesh it out. I can expand it. That there is that chachma. But then there is chachma that transcends that. There's the chachma that's still connected to the essence. That chachma is not touchable. So the chachma that's in the heichal, the chachma that comes down into Bina, that chachma the Greeks can desecrate. That chachma, they can make it impure. But the essential Jewish soul, the essential flask of oil, cannot be destroyed. And so when they go into the Beis HaMikdash and they find this drop of oil, this is when there's the complete conquering over of the Greeks. Because this is exactly what the Greek has the opposition to, right? This is what the Hellenist has the opposition to the fact that there is a Jewish spark that transcends everything. The fact that there is an essential spark that is united with Hashem. That irrational, illogical part of us, that fact, that is exactly what they're fighting against, and we still find that oil, right? We find it and it's not touched, because by nature of the fact that it is irrational, it cannot be ruined. Why is that? I don't know if any of you have ever engaged in, let's say, a rational debate with somebody else, right? So let's say you're debating something in the world of logic. When it comes to a logical debate, at the end of the day, once we're debating in logic, whoever basically knows how to out-logic the other person is going to win. As long as, and often that's just the smarter talker, not necessarily the person who has the better idea. But as long as we're going down, if we would start engaging the Greek with logic, so, start bringing Bible codes that prove the truth of Judaism, or anything else that's like, start trying to explain exactly why this is so good, and in a rational, logical way, it's very, very easy for that argument to get tainted. It's very easy for that argument to be won. I think we can also experience this now with, let's say, the war in Israel, or in general, the attitudes that people have towards Israel and the hatred, or in general, anti-Semitism. Then when we start to try to explain ourselves, like in general, to an anti-Semite, right? You try to start to explain yourself, to defend yourself in a logical way, it's never gonna work. It's not gonna work. You're just gonna end up being dragged through the mud. Obviously, there are people who are known debaters or whatever, but the result is never a positive result at the end of the day. It's never a lasting positive result. What is our strongest mode of defense is through pride in who we are, conviction, commitment to who we are. Not when I start going down into the logical arguments, but I just say, I'm a Jew, that's it. Like, there's nothing to fight with me against. This is our land, Hashem gave it to us. Nothing to fight against, right? There's no arguments over there, because it's not logic. So there's no logical argument. When we go to that space of super rational ideas, that's when we're able to overcome the logic. Fighting logic with logic, one is always going to win over the other, you don't know who. But when you're fighting the logic with the super rational, but with a true strength and conviction, It only works if you're really, really committed to it and connected to it. That is able to overcome. And that's what we call the power of Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh, which often is translated to Jews giving up their lives, al Kiddush Hashem, right? Giving up their lives in order to uphold our faith and tradition. That is given as the ultimate example of something that's irrational, because on a logical level, on a rational level, we all want to live. That's what makes sense. It makes sense to do whatever you need to do to live. And so when someone gives up their life to preserve Judaism, they are going against all basic human, basically drive. And that's completely and totally an irrational type of thing to do. And through the power of Mesiras Nefesh, we're able to overcome the war against the Greek. But Mesiras Nefesh doesn't only have to be in giving up my life. I can have that same conviction and stay alive, right? But I need to tap into that same conviction that I would have to give up my life. It has to be so strong. If I felt it so strong that I would be willing to die for this. But instead, I feel this so strong and I'm going to live with it, right? I'm going to live with it, and I'm going to fight against the darkness that's around me by just being so absolutely connected to who I am, so absolutely connected to the essence of my soul, which transcends even my desire to live. So absolutely connected to the chachma, to the oil that is untouchable. That's how I fight against the darkness. And this leads us into why is it that we specifically light 8 candles, even though in the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash they only lit 7 candles. So obviously in this act of lighting candles, what are we doing? We're bringing light into darkness. That's the nature of lighting candles. But in the Beis HaMikdash, when they were lighting the candles, they were still lighting within the rational world. And that's why there was only 7, because 7 in general represents nature. 7, Hashem created the world in 7 days. There are 7 midos, and 7 in general represents just the natural order. Natural order is always represented through 7. So in the Beis HaMikdash, they were lighting the menorah, and they were drawing out this beautiful light, but it stayed within the realm of nature and within the realm of the world. On Chanukah, our point is to tap into the 8th dimension, because that's what we said. The entire theme of Chanukah is to connect to that chachma, to connect to that which transcends nature, to connect to that which transcends logic. So if logic is within the 7, we need to connect to the 8th. And that's why we have our 8 candles and not just our 7 candles. And specifically, our goal on Chanukah, as opposed to the menorah, again, was just bringing light into the world in the Beis HaMikdash, but our goal on Chanukah is to specifically fight against this absolute darkness that we face in the world. And that's why we specifically light it not during the daytime, but it's supposed to be at nighttime, because the light that comes into darkness is much more apparent and much more obvious. So if we're going to be trying to stick to our convictions in this way, it's much more apparent and obvious when it's coming in the darkest night. And it's a very interesting thing. It says that Zelu umazeh barasa elikim, that Hashem created everything in this world with every positive thing in this world was also created with a negative counterpart. So everything that exists, all of the energies that are in this world have a negative counterpart. So the same way you can have chesed for kindness, kindness, chesed, kindness for good, there is ways that chesed and kindness can be used negatively. The same way you can have gevura for good, gevura can also be used in a negative way, in a way that's not positive. The only thing that exists without a negative counterpart is, like we mentioned before, that oil. The essence of the Jewish soul, the part of the Jewish soul that is completely and totally, the Yechidah, that is completely and totally connected with Hashem. There is no negative counterpart to that. There's nothing that we need to fight against on that level. As long as we enable it to just express itself, if we just allow ourselves to surrender to the fact that it exists, to surrender within myself to the fact that I am absolutely and totally united with Hashem, and I let myself really accept that and acknowledge it, then that light completely and totally overwhelms everything else, because there is no force that fights against it. And so that is our Chanukah, sort of, if we talk about the physical thing that we do on Chanukah to add light, is by lighting a menorah, sharing a menorah with another Jew, making sure that every Jew that you know lights a menorah of their own, making sure that everyone sees the menorah. That's the physical action that we do. But the spiritual work that we do on Chanukah is lighting that candle, lighting that oil within myself, is allowing the expression of the fact that I am united with Hashem to come, to allow that to come into expression. Because it's something that I think sometimes we resist. We want to maintain our independence, or we don't accept ourselves fully to believe that we could be completely and totally united with Hashem. And we don't believe that we have this essential bond with Hashem. We don't really believe it. We might be told it and hear it in our brains, but it doesn't come into our purest conviction all the way into what we would call Mesiras Nefesh, where I would be willing to give myself up because I believe this so strongly. And so on Chanukah, like we said, we're bringing the light into the darkness. Specifically, it says that the closer we get to Mashiach, the sort of further along in the day it is. So it's darker. We're past nightfall already, right? It's like it's dark outside and we feel the darkness very strongly. We can feel that it's time to really light the menorah. Like it's after nightfall, we're allowed to light the menorah. This is a time for lighting the menorah. So not just physically lighting the menorah, but also within ourselves to really accept that I have the power to be a light just by connecting to the deepest part of myself, which is completely and totally one with Hashem. And that's gonna trickle down into every other part of your life. That's gonna trickle down into the way that you do every mitzvah. That's gonna trickle down into the way that you learn Torah. It's gonna trickle down into into your relationships with other people, because automatically when I become this person that is the menorah, that is the light, that is allowing the light of Hashem to come through in everything that I do, it ends up being the most impactful thing that you can light yourself. So just probably just like an idea of like a Chanukah meditation, that as you light the menorah, to think that I also, for myself, have to turn on the light inside myself, or not turn on the light inside myself. The light inside myself is always there. It's impossible to be extinguished, as we mentioned, right? Nothing can turn it off. I have to just let it shine out within myself, not try to hide it, not try to dim it, not be scared of it, but to let it be. So yeah, we should all experience that. And just after the class is over now, this should all be in the merit of Chaya Bas Yisrael. This is sponsored by Natalie Hahn in honor of her mother's yahrzeit. And all the Chanukah light that we let into our lives should all be in the merit of her soul.